Hi again. It is my pleasure to introduce our next plenary speaker, Dr. Josiah Hester. He is the Alton Junior Faculty Chair and Associate Professor of Interactive Computing and Computer Science at Georgia Tech. Josiah was previously at Northwestern as an assistant professor. He works in intermittent computing and battery-free embedded computing systems. He applies his work to health wearables, interactive devices, and large-scale sensing for sustainability and conservation supported by multiple grants from the NSF, NIH, and DARPA. He was named a Sloan Fellow in Computer Science and won his NSF career in 2022. He was named one of Popular Science's Brilliant 10, won the American Indian Science and Engineering Society's Most Promising Scientist/Engineer Award, and the 3M Non-Tenured Faculty Award in 2021. His work has received 6 Best Paper Type Awards and 7 Best Presentation Type Awards, and featured in the Wall Street Journal, Scientific American, BBC, Popular Science, Communications of the ACM, and the Guinness Book of World Records, among many others. So give it to Josiah.
Thanks. Thank you, Khalil. Let's try this. Aloha, maybe. Yeah, no, come on. You gotta say it back to me. All right. Aloha. There we go. All right. So I kind of always wanted to do that. We really only do that for tourists, but you know, it was fun for me too. Aloha kako. I'm Josiah Hester. Wonderful introduction from Khalil. I'm going to try and stay in this box, which will be difficult, and I'll try not to flail my arms about wildly. That's one of my favorite things to do. And you know, reading that bio, it's interesting, right? It does get longer as I get older, but also the number of rejections, early career award fails and misses, proposals being like thrown back with like, the panel didn't even discuss it. All of those things also start to pile up. So in that bio, you're seeing kind of the high points, but many of us now are keeping track of the things that maybe would have been considered failures, but that I consider something I grew and learned about. And that's actually why this is called My Story of Handling Failure in Computing. And I need to find the slide thing. I think it's over here. Thank you, Stacey. Cool. And before we go on, you know, thank you so much to Stacey for an amazing talk. She was actually advisor to one of my dear, dear friends, Kevin Storr, who is now at Google. And then we both won Popular Science Brilliant 10 the same year. And that was, so very cool, amazing talk, and really inspiring. It'll be hard to follow, so I'm just going to take it in a totally different direction. So my goal for today, really 2 things. So first I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story. And actually my story and my career and my research intersect in 100 different ways. And so within my story, I'm going to tell you a lot about the work and the research that I do that is really focused on sustainability and comes from this place that is centered around my native Hawaiian, Kanaka Maoli, indigenous culture, heritage, and traditions. And so at the end of this, I'll really try and convince you to join in on this sustainable computing, battery-free Internet of Things revolution. Right, so we'll unpack that. All right, so from the start of this, the way I phrase my work, and so we're going to talk about all the research and then pull back to a little bit about me, and you'll see the connections. But the way I phrase my work is thinking about 7th-generation decision-making. So this is a concept in many indigenous, Native American, Hawaiian cultures, right, of I want to make choices right now about what I'm building, what I'm doing, that are going to have positive impacts 7 generations in the future, right? Can I build, maybe artifacts, things that last that long, or maybe new techniques and ways to operate and build computer systems, right, that are sustainable, resilient, and maybe hopefully useful for the entire lifetime of the people, places, and things they support. So this could be computers that last many, many decades, or it could be computers that are ephemeral, but they can be 100% recycled or 100% reused, right? And this kind of mindset informs a lot of the things that we do. And so my lab is called Ka Moa Moa. There's a story behind it, but it's basically, if you've seen Moana And you know that voyaging canoe? There's this thing at the very end called the mo'omoa, the tip of the canoe, and that is where the akua, the spirit, resides, which guides voyagers on their journeys. And so, in my kind of high-minded, or one way to think of that is, as scientists, as researchers, we are tasked with providing alternative ways to navigate through society and technology, right? We're guides in a way. And so that's kind of how we see the lab, the mo'omoa. And so we build sustainable computational things. So, tiny little things, interactive stuff, things that you take batteries out of. Most of like the really shiny things that I've done, I basically looked at a device and be like, let's take the battery out of that, and what will happen? And then, it turns out it worked out okay. So, but why should you care, right? Okay, sustainability, sustainable computing, sounds cool. Thankfully, this is an easier case year after year after year, but imagine giving this case, 7, 10 years ago. Why should you care, and what is the problem we're solving? And why are you even here? So we're going to step back. Who remembers or knows Moore's law? Well, I won't ask you to raise your hand. There's a corollary to this called Bell's law of computer science, or computer classes, that says that basically a new type or class of computer emerges every decade or so. So think back to like the 50s, 60s. There were these mini computers, like a single company had them. It did all of the accounting for the entire gigantic company. Went to, workstations for engineers, so you do CAD tools, like building, jets and stuff like that with computers. Then went to personal computers, and then we get to maybe now the place where y'all remember things, where we have, smartphones and things like that. So every decade, right, computers are getting smaller and smaller, and there's getting more and more of them. They're more applicable to more people. So going from one computer for 1 million people to thousands of computers per person on the planet. And in 2007, we actually crossed that threshold of more computers, computational devices, than people on the planet. And I'm not the only one saying this. In fact, a lot of the industry kind of thought leaders are saying that in the years ahead, trillions of computers running AI will create a new Internet of Things that is thousands of times larger than today's Internet of People. So I think of that, and I think of a trillion problems, right? I think of a trillion batteries, right? Even rechargeables, they're not really a feasible way to power a trillion connected devices. So just think giant landfills filled, or warehouses filled with half-dead batteries, causing fires, sitting there, leaching chemicals into the soil, and also the upstream, downstream effects of mining lithium from mostly indigenous communities that are water insecure. And so there has to be a better way to do this, and really, to make it super practical just for first world problems, who wants to replace, charge a trillion batteries? All right, so instead of batteries, I'm into this thing called energy harvesting, right? So you've probably seen the giant solar panel fields. Well, think of like, thumbnail-sized solar panels, RF harvesting, maybe motion, different types of things where I can capture energy from something and then use it to power a computational task, like sense something, take a picture, right? But the big problem of my research comes from the fact that the battery in my cell phone, which is in my bag, but the battery in my cell phone, or in your cell phone, is, think of the energy storage in that as the mass in this elephant, African elephant. Now compare that to the energy storage in these little capacitors that we replace these batteries with. That's like the mass difference between the elephant and this ant. So this is where the research, the engineering, the science comes in. How do you provide some useful utility, some useful feature, some useful thing with this level of energy? All right, so my position in research is that the future of computing is going to have fewer batteries, it's going to have to be maintenance-free, and it must be programmable by everyone, and maybe programmed by everyone. But we really have to be willing to rethink everything. All right, so what does this look like? So I'm going to play a video, hopefully. We'll see if it plays. Yes, sweet. So what does this future look like? Well, we can build sustainable sensor networks for monitoring the environment. So this is the Kakagan Sloughs in Wisconsin. This is a Ramsar protected wetland that has one of the largest places for manomen, the Ojibwe word for wild rice, which is an ecologically and dietarily important food. This is me walking around in the ceded territories that, and deploying sensors, so these are energy harvesting, to help us understand why manomen and the ecosystem is changing because of climate change, development, and other things. So this is the battery-free Game Boy. We designed this as basically a design provocation to help people think about alternative mechanisms for computing devices, mobiles, and all kinds of other things, and showing that you could take a battery out of something that had a screen and it could still work in some way. So the Game Boy, this is me struggling to play Tetris, no judgment. This is the FaceBit, a smart face mask platform. These are my students kind of experimenting with it, testing it out. So this is something that can be affixed inside your mask and can gather different health metrics, heart rate, maybe blood pressure, heart rate, respiration rate, also a measure of mask fit, if you have an N95. And these can be used to inform critical care workers. This is home, Kaneohe, Hawaii. This same kind of batteryless vision can be applied in how we learn to code or learn to program. So this is a Kaiapuni Hawaiian immersion school in Hawaii where we're teaching the students how to code battery-free energy harvesting computers to then take those to the fish pond that my ancestors and their ancestors built almost 400 years ago, which is shown here, to monitor and understand the changes in this fish pond that have been happening because of climate change, but also because the Army Corps of Engineers put a sewage station right in front of this ancient fish pond. And then this is a wonderful thing that the students sent to me, which I still have. So that's a vision, potentially of, or even progress of this kind of sustainable idea around computing. And I call this a sustainable computational things, right? So we're reducing reliance on batteries, we're using energy harvesting, we're trying to reduce the burden in general on people and the planet, which means devices have to last for decades or be reusable or be biodegradable or recyclable, right? So these are all these requirements that are coming in there informing how we're defining a research agenda. So I want to make something useful that anyone can have at a low cost and that's not going to burden the planet. Super easy, right? We can get there. All right, so how do we actually do this? So the way I look at our research process is we play a lot with foundational computer science, computer systems stuff. So when I started in computing, I was most attracted, much like Stacy, to puzzles, but really to this, it grew into this creative art, like a creative way to express myself, my identity, my culture through building things, right? I loved Legos, I love forts. I now like to build computers and try not to get electrocuted. So how do we do these useful things despite power failures is this middle rung of our approach. Useful could be sense, compute, communicate, infer. Then we think about, all right, well, computing is probably not enough. We need to be multidisciplinary because I can't just make the computer run fast and that'll solve our problems. So I need to go back and look at maybe new materials, right? New techniques to fabricate something, maybe a new device, and use that within computing to get these useful co-design trade-offs, or useful speed-ups, or useful properties. But it doesn't stop there, right? So we're going from materials and devices, maybe low-level, to computing itself, and then to human-computer interaction. Like, what new interactive modalities can we now design or enable, and how can we co-design these devices to be useful within specific contexts and within specific communities? So how do I design a computer that can harvest energy that a sixth grader can program? And this sixth grader is native Hawaiian, so they have this whole context of how they approach and think about the world, but they also have this oppression that has been put upon them where they're in a school system that is under-resourced, where they may not be even literate, and they may not even be able to type. So how do we, approach these navigate these barriers within design of computer systems? So we integrate these methods from across all of these areas to create real-world demonstration, things I can hold, right, and throw maybe, of sustainable computational things. So a lot of hardware. I'll talk about a few of these today. A lot of new materials and new things, new fabrication techniques. A lot of software, right? That's the bread and butter, right? Many algorithms, signal processing approaches maybe, scheduling, maybe lower level computer systems research, and then lots of systems. So deploying things in or on animals, in or on people, in different places, all kinds of different places where these systems can be tested. And we work in these 4 different application areas so that we can continue to kind of motivate the need for sustainable computational things, right? So environmental justice, interactive devices, education, and health. All right. So that's like the big blurb, like, right? That's the thing that I give, kind of, sort of, that I give to, Georgia Tech when I was trying to get them to hire me, which I just started like 7 days ago, so I'm going to try and remember that it's the buzz. Yeah, anyway, I got it. Yeah, thank you. That's kind of the pitch, right? That's the pitch of the research that I give to try and convince people to like jump in and join on the side, of good, the forces of good, to take the batteries out of things and make really useful things. So that pitch, that like background, that process has been kind of growing, and I've been learning about myself for the past 30 plus years, right? And maybe even beyond that. I've been integrating even my ancestors and my elders' knowledge to understand how to think about computing within the context and within my identity as an indigenous person, because there ain't many of us. So let's just put a point on that. So this is the Talby survey. This is PhDs awarded by ethnicity. Talby, every year, right, they send out things to all of the departments, and they're like, all right, have all of your students and faculty identify themselves, and then we're going to release this report on kind of the state of computer science with many different metrics. All right, so let's see if you can find me. So I don't know if you can see that. So this was 2017, and I was the only Native Hawaiian / Pacific Islander to get a PhD in computer science that year. Ouch. So what is that? 0.1%. We did have someone in information science, wherever they are. There you go. And actually, the year before, we did have 8 Native Hawaiians get PhDs, and so it's not as dire. But then the year after, it was 0, right? This is like the thing I track, right? Because I want to know, and every time I'm like, hey, who else is out there, right? Let's meet up. I'm going to find my people, right? Literally. And so that was kind of, growing up in this context, and then also being someone who struggled with their identity, didn't quite understand it because we, due to poverty and racism, left Hawaii, 60s, and then went to North Carolina in the middle of the Civil Rights Movement. Great time for a person of color, and great place. And so this whole thing kind of made it difficult for me to understand and embrace my own culture and language. I don't actually speak Olelo, Hawaii, our native language, because I was on the mainland. And I've had to rediscover and come to terms with mixed identity and how this is kind of, and claim it, right? Which Stacy was even talking about in the context of disability, claim that that is my identity and see how it has changed me, and acknowledge it, right? Because it has changed how I think of and how I view things, even from the beginning. All right, spent too long on that slide, sorry. And for those who don't know, Native Hawaiians are the indigenous Polynesian people of the Hawaiian Islands. Indigenous, Aboriginal, depends on who you ask. We also call ourselves Kanaka Maoli or Kanaka Uivi. So, or Canucks, what you doing, Canucks, hoi. So this is more personal because for more context, and this is kind of my opportunity to maybe educate some of you, the Hawaiian Kingdom was a sovereign nation in 1893, January 16th. January 17th, it was illegally annexed through a mostly bloodless coup that was supported by imperialist United States here, right? And then we eventually became a state, but all of these things kind of happened. No, we were an actual kingdom. We had flush toilets and electricity before the White House. I also like to talk about that. So it wasn't just some, let's educate the poor indigenous people. No. We were the advanced people, anyway. So it continues, whenever Kanakamo'oli, Native Hawaiians introduce each other, or we come and say, hey, we're always like, okay, who's your family? What are the names? How are we connected? What's our closest ancestor? Oh, wow, we're third cousins, right? There's so many third cousins. And unfortunately, part of that is because of the overthrow and many other factors. The Native Hawaiian population went from 1 million to 600,000 to about 32,000 people, almost lost the language, and then it's back up to 5, 6, 700,000, right, after a language and cultural renaissance. And so this is my great Tutukane, Moses Koki, who was a postmaster general in Honolulu, died in 1841. Laulani Koki was his daughter. And then Herbert Kihoi was Laulani's son. Herbert married Sarah, and they had Tutu Elizabeth Halil Laulani, so in remembrance of Laulani Kihoi. And she is the one on your left. That's my grandmother when she was ripping it, playing some sax back at a band competition, which she won, and which she swears to this day that she kissed Elvis at. And we have to believe her. There's no video evidence, but he was there a lot. Blue Hawaii, you've probably seen it. And then, a lot of the music that we had, so I was too embarrassed to do a show tunes, but maybe I should have, done that after Stacy. But this is my Auntie Edna with Ray Kinney, and this was like the original Aloha Girls, who kind of went around on USO tours, went and performed in New York City back in the 20s, 30s, 40s. And this was kind of like the early, almost connection of Native Hawaiian culture within the broader context of the US. All right, so here's just some more. I'm just giving you a little bit more kind of the family and where we're at. Top left is me ripping it at Sandy's. About 30 milliseconds later, I was tumbling over the falls. For those that bodyboard, they'll know what I'm talking about. Bottom left is my mom in the middle. So she was a curator at Iolani Palace, right? So it was very important for our family to both take care of and curate the knowledge that was passed down from our own family, often oral knowledge, often just heard or overheard when the aunties and elders were talking to each other, right? How can we preserve this precious kind of knowledge? And that was what my mom chose to do with her time and her life, and we're very appreciative. And then in the middle is the Roll Commission, and this is actually at the Smithsonian right now. I'm not sure if it's on exhibit now, but it was, where my Auntie Lei, who is on the right in the middle picture, a lawyer, was a key person in kind of the different indigenous rights movements and for Native Hawaiians, did an entire Roll Commission and was part of the apology, right, from Barack Obama for the illegal annexation. And then on the far right is me making a really silly face but the girls look great, so that's my wife Emily and my 2 daughters. So I don't know, Shrek and the 3 beautiful fair, whatever it is, yeah. And so that's us in Hawaii, just hanging out, and that's kind of a key part of the story as well. All right, so the key part here, and maybe this is the big takeaway, and I know, what am I doing giving you the big takeaway in the middle of the talk, but I'll remind you, my story, my culture, my ancestors, and my background have defined my career journey in computing. And that was intentional. In a way, had no choice, right? But I also made sure to let it happen, right? And embrace the things that were unique about me, that had value from these perspectives within computing, and then to hopefully maybe change computing and maybe society, maybe the world, if we're really going to think that broad, for the better within these contexts. All right, so what's the timeline then? And so you remember, excuse me, you remember I talked about, we got some awards, we got papers, I was able to get a faculty job, ridiculous. So also I have had to overcome mad imposter syndrome. Does anyone else have imposter syndrome? Yeah, so if you don't raise your hand, you have what's called Dunning-Kruger which is where you think you don't have imposter syndrome. But that's an important thing to acknowledge. Anyway, so this is kind of the timeline. And so this is really, I learned to code fairly early on. And when I say learn to code, I was like doing HTML, right? And I remember learning HTML, so that, markup language for the web way back in the day, and was told by someone else who was coding, like, oh, not coding, that's just markup. And I was like, oh, okay, what does that mean? This person just told me, right? And so even, it's felt like at every point, right, when I've learned a new skill, even now, I will say, as an associate professor, that there has been some level of, I don't know if that's, did you really learn that, or was it just you kind of cheated somehow to be able to do that, right? So learned coding basics, HTML, then got into this, Java language. But my first job, right, because I could not pay any bills with that, was digging ditches, doing construction, and demo, right? So I was a pretty big dude. I'm really the runt of the family in Hawaii, but that's another story. Digging ditches and construction and demo, because that's how you could get some cash. And then eventually, like, okay, we're going to go to college. Cool, college, interesting. What is that? Dad did it, and he said it sucked, and he barely graduated. But the best thing that happened was he met mom. So I guess, I don't know, we'll see how that works. So I was able to get, into Clemson University, which is down, just across the way, South Carolina. Wonderful place, go Tigers. They did just beat Georgia Tech in football, 4 or 5 days ago. It wasn't very pretty. Anyway, I was able to go through this, get through a BS in computer science. Of course, I was the only native Hawaiian. I remember they asked, orientation. They were like, all right, who's from Alaska? Who's from Maryland? Who's from blah, blah, blah. There's a bunch of people screaming. Then they asked, Alaska. Woo. And then, okay, Hawaii. It was just me. And I was like, oh, what? Anyway. And so that type of, that was fine, though, because I found my people. I found places that I could connect, hang out with, make friends, and learn all those skills that kind of set me up, right, to go on this current career path. All right, so I got my bachelor's, but because I graduated a little bit early, and then all my friends were kind of like more extended, including my wife, I was like, oh, I'm going to hang around, and I was going to do, I decided to help out just line coding iPad apps for this chemistry education professor, right? So we're doing all kinds of really interesting things, and that was actually the first time I encountered research from the perspective of, I have a hypothesis I want to test, and I'm going to build a tool that will help me test this hypothesis. And that tool was what I was building for this to help us understand the impact of, trying to teach different methods for organic chem, right? Which organic chem is terrible, and the point of that was to make it a little less so. And it did work, actually, and that was really cool, because we got to see a cohort of chemistry majors get better, right? Go from D's to B's. The B's and A's, they just stayed at B's and A's. But the D's to F's and D's to B's was huge, right? That was the outcome we wanted. That taught me a lot. So I discovered research, and then I met my future PhD advisor. Just got hot off a postdoc, at UMass Amherst, and was like, you guys, I have this crazy idea. Let's take batteries out of things. And I was like, what the heck are you talking about, you crazy man? And so we kind of got to talking, and then he introduced me to these little things called embedded systems, or MOTES, or wireless sensor networks. So I went into his class, and he was like, we're going to be doing mobile computing. I was like, a phone is a mobile computer. I've done iPad apps. Easy A, baby, sweet. Show up, and this guy's like, just kidding, this is a mobile computer. What I'm holding is just this little tiny printed circuit board, right? This is a mobile computer, and you're going to read 70 research papers in this semester. I was like, what the heck is this guy? I was like, all right, cool. He seems nice. He tells good stories. Let's hang out. But I met him, and long story short, that was kind of what led into these ideas around physical computing and energy harvesting. All right, so after that, there were some struggles, of course, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about why doing a PhD is really flipping hard, especially money-wise, all that stuff. But we got through, and then I was lucky enough to, and I'd done a lot of flipping work, right, to get a job at Northwestern as an assistant professor, right? And they were looking specifically for an embedded systems person, and I was like, embedded systems, let's do this. So started that job and kind of, walked into my office the first day, or really like the third day because I couldn't find a key, which is, hard. I still need to get my key for Georgia Tech. And walked in and just sat down. I was like, what the heck do I do now? And that was a very key moment because I had let a lot of my research agenda be defined by my advisor. And this is a typical thing, right, for a PhD. And so I was like, all right, well, what is my identity as a researcher, and what are the things that matter most to me? And that's when I begin to also come to terms, even more so, right, with my own culture, my own background, and I have kind of played, right, with understanding, like, yeah, we're making a more sustainable world, potentially by taking batteries out, using energy harvesting, but there's something deeper here, right, that connects, right? It's not just intermittent computing, which is the name of the kind of the stolid, fancy area. It's more than that, right? And so those really 5 years at Northwestern were key to me forming my identity around as an indigenous Native Hawaiian researcher working on sustainable computing. Computing that is rethought through the viewpoint, through the eyes of an indigenous person, right? What if we could rewind those 50, 60, 70 years of computing that was done by people not like me, where it was purely motivated by performance, right, by finance, and instead do it for, well, let's make this in a better way where it's not going to negatively impact the world, not just in conservation and batteries and lithium, but also to be more accessible, right? Why is it that I didn't have access to maybe a mainframe type thing at the time? Or why is it that an Apple Watch costs $400, $500, $600, right? Why can't this cost $10 and work without internet connectivity and never have to be recharged, right? So that's when I kind of had this epiphany of let's roll back this and start fresh and show a potentially new agenda for research that we can kind of get behind. And y'all, it's flippin' cool, all right? So we're about to talk about that. Key part here, I got married to Emily. She's awesome. Then had 2 babies, took paternity leave, which was similarly awesome. I remember nothing because I didn't sleep at all, which was great preparation, right, for going to conferences and only getting 6 hours of sleep, as Stacy mentioned. So what was that PhD topic? I'll give you the quick one again, right? We're harvesting energy, and this is where we're going to kind of transition to show you why I think this agenda is cool and to show you that we can connect our own or your own identity with the research to impact, not just research, but the work that you think is important that is highly related to you and your community, right? And you don't have to go to academia to do this. You can go to any place and you can embrace that identity and then build your work around that, and you will have a positive impact. All right, so we store it. Remember the elephant? Elephant is the phone, tons of energy. The ant is a capacitor. We have problems now. So what this is now intermittent computing, where we have kind of power failures. We gather energy, we store it, we use that energy up, and then we have some amount of time when we're off. This was the kind of the theoretical framework of what I'm trying to uncover. We build hardware. We try to figure out how to keep time even when your computer is off. Sounds cool. We'd figure out how to save state, all kinds of potential ways that you can read on my website or read my papers about. But the key part here was we now had this arsenal of techniques to handle failure, and failure in computing. And then also in many ways, because of this kind of endurance, this marathon, and this kind of period of self-discovery, I also had an arsenal of techniques to steel myself against the kind of pushback and potential rejection from pushing out a new or slightly different idea into the area, right? So what I was thinking was, let's take these advances, the things that we have existing that we kind of left. They're like, cool, we built a cool system, but let's actually swing them over to make new and interesting applications. And then by doing that, we'll also get the benefit of new applications that motivate more fundamental work. All right, so we're going to go through these fast, but you can ask questions. So first thing I want to talk about is the battery-free Game Boy. So why the heck would we make a battery-free Game Boy? The most obvious answer is, why not? It's a battery-free Game Boy. You just answered your question right there, right? But really, the way I wanted to think about it was as a design provocation. Can we make computer systems that you look at a little funny and you're like, wait, they can do that? That's interesting. Why didn't, well, I was trying to think of who wasn't a sponsor here. Why didn't GM, redesign their electronic, control displays to be battery-free and wireless instead of this in this sense, right? Sorry, GM. This was our attempt to potentially inspire radical approaches to climate change within the context of computing, but also outside. So here's me playing in the sun. This is in Chicago sun, right? So, functioning pretty well. Turns off, saves the state exactly. You keep on going. The buttons that I'm pressing are actually giving energy for this thing to execute and continue, as well as those solar panels, right? So, interaction-powered computing. So this was a lot of systems challenges, and this is, like those puzzles and those things that really make you like, get very unhappy. Many of these came in here. We had, unpredictable energy harvesting. So, okay, we're going to harvest energy from gamer actions. This was one of the ways we innovated. We're going to emulate that original Game Boy hardware. We're going to figure out novel, neat ways to save state. And we're going to actually try to analyze if this is still fun, right? I'm having to give up something, right? I'm losing power. I'm coming back on. I'm giving up like that totally continuous play. But this thing will survive, through the zombie apocalypse, right? We did this paper 3 years ago, and it sat on my desk, and I recently picked it up, and it's still in the same place, right? And I just resumed the Tetris game, right? So that's pretty cool, right? Whereas my other Game Boy that has batteries has been long dead, long dead. All right, so here's some cool hardware pics. It's eye candy. Did it actually work? This was cool. This is one of the first times we saw the impact of the work make it into some of the mainstream, right? I mean, it was a provocation. That was somewhat of the intent, right? But this got people interested, and it's even got me on panels with United Nations and other things like that to talk about the impacts of computing on society and how sustainable computing might be an alternative, right? And what that even meant. So of course there's a bunch of interesting ways, can we make Tamagotchi, or can we do Dance Dance Revolution with this? All kinds of fun ways that maybe science could intersect with joy. And since this was the mid-pandemic, joy was really something that I wanted to have on everyone's mind. All right, so the other way, another method that we thought of for integrating these ideas of sustainable computational devices was burden in health. So a lot of times if you have, your Apple Watch, your Android Watch, some type of wearable device, it's got a battery in it, right? And you are trained to charge it every 6 to 8 hours, right? You can also think about an orthotic or a smart prosthetic, right? This could be attached. It has a 6-hour battery life. And guess what? If you're at dinner and you stay a little long for dinner, you get up and you're stuck, right? So I got to go find a USB plug for my leg? No, not acceptable, right? So how could we think about these types of critical care devices within the context of sustainable computational devices with this idea of reducing burden? Well, FaceBit was funded by NSF Rapid project, a zero burden wearable health tracker, right? So something that you put in your mask, it affixes with a magnet on the inside or outside, and it's epoxied, right? So it's waterproof, and then it can gather various health metrics, right? So it gets your heart rate by the ballistic force of blood rushing through your head, which makes you tick just a little bit like this. We can detect that, and then gets other things like respiration rate and your mask fit, which is really important for understanding something like maybe fatigue or safety within clinical settings. Because this was really a direct response to kind of clinical needs. So captures a bunch of safety metrics, also found ways that we could harvest energy from breath itself, use this energy to then power sensing. So then you could potentially, not with this current version, potentially have this device last forever, just kind of on the breathing force itself. And this was another way where it's like, okay, think about these intersection of health wearable devices that we've just expected to have to plug in. What if we don't? Well, that's really interesting. Now it becomes open to pediatric, geriatric, critical and safety conscious applications. Could be big, right? This is a really important way that the things could have impact. So I showed this a little bit, and I'll be brief, but the other way that this identity intersected really strongly, my identity as an Indigenous person, with my work was, well, how do I monitor and take care of the land? Because the land takes care of the people. How do I provide this without burdening the land? Am I going to throw batteries that are going to leach harmful chemicals into sacred soil, right? And these are conversations we've had, right? Maybe not, right? So are there ways that we can non-invasively monitor the land and also reduce the burden on the people, mostly Indigenous folks, who are responsible for these gigantic areas that are pristine, conservation, that have so many other things to do, like fighting oil companies, right? How can we have this influx of sensing and data science technologies and cyber infrastructure to equip citizen scientists like journalists, like tribes, and local communities? And as one example, so this is a map of Monoman, wild rice, that used to cover half, or maybe a third of the continent 100 years ago. It is now only in this single place, kind of western Great Lakes. Why is that? Well, environmental threats, such as climate change, of course, has changed all of the ecosystem and how things work, and has destroyed this kind of linchpin, important food, sacred food for Anishinaabe, Ojibwe tribes. And then development and pipelines and all kinds of other things have really hurt and impaired these ecosystems. So we are, through NSF funding under a $5 million grant, building cyber infrastructure, partnering with communities to understand the ways that this area has changed, and then to try and direct interventions so that we can maybe bring some of this back and at least restore parts of this really important, sacred, in many cases, natural resource. All right. Ooh. So we've been doing a bunch of stuff. This is negative 10-degree weather deploying a camera trap. That is actually a lake that's frozen over. Pretty crazy. But let's now move to the final thing. So how can everyone participate in a battery-free future? So I really wanted to understand how we can have energy harvesting for all, and within the context of Kaiapuni, Hawaiian Language Immersion Public Schools, which is this thing that came out maybe, I think it was late 80s, where your entire curriculum as a native Hawaiian is taught in your native language, and this is the best way for you to encounter your culture and understand kind of the different ways that your culture has influenced and changed you. And so with this project, we were helping, working with Microsoft MakeCode, changing how that program, that online program functions to make technology to assist with revitalizing culture, right? So getting unifying themes of sustainability or malama aina to teach computing to native Hawaiians at different age and skill levels. And so we wanted to use something that had no barrier to coding, so just get a library card and a $20 kit with USB, and then you can build something online and then go plug a solar panel into it and then deploy it outside, right? Potentially for years. And building all kinds of things from wearables to environmental sensors to even something to watch your garden. So these different ways to engage with Indigenous people like me where they're at and for applications and things that are important to them. Because like Stacy said, hello world and sea sucks, right? That is the best way to chase all of us out. I mean, I didn't like it either when I did it in sea. I was like, what is all this crap around here? But maybe imagine if instead your first experience with computing was taking a water quality sensor, putting an energy harvester into it, you've never seen a battery in your life, and then you're putting that water quality sensor into a 400-year-old fish pond that was a source of food for your community for hundreds of years that your ancestors built. And you're putting that in there to understand the changes and how you can help be a part of restoring it. That is flipping awesome, right? That's the hello world that I would like within this context. Thank you. So very quickly, because this is not me, this is a lot of work, and there are a ton of students and staff that I've shown up here, and are not getting enough credit in a single slide, and some of them are here actually, and a bunch of collaborators and many funders and really wonderful partners that we've worked with to make a lot of this happen, to make the work more real. And remember that our approach is to bring together multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary teams to build demonstrations of sustainable computational things across 4 different application areas, applying these foundations of computing to impactful applications, and then understanding new lodestars for foundational engineering to go after based on these new applications. And those are those applications that I think are most interesting to me, that I hope all of us can participate in. And the real takeaway, right, is the future of computing is going to have fewer batteries. It's going to be maintenance-free and programmable by all, but we have to be willing to rethink everything. And we have to, I think, especially with this group, embrace our own identities as a guide for how we think about computing and how we do rewind computing back and rethink the path and the choices we made to make something that is more equitable, more accessible, more inclusive, and honestly just straight up better, right, than what it is now. And so that's kind of what I leave you with. I hope that you will use the skills that, you're already here. You have incredible skills. You all have imposter syndrome, but you really don't have to because you're all awesome. And I hope you'll think about how you can, instead of going after maybe the path that you see other people in your class going after, think about how is my identity informed, what I know and what I can offer, and how can I take that and build my own thing and make the impact I want to make. And while it worked for me in this instant, it is hard, it is challenging, and build this community around you to help you go for it. And yeah, thank you so much. I'll take some questions for sure. Mahalo.
Thank you. So we're just about out of time, so I'm going to ask you the top question. It goes to what you were just saying, and this questioner says, Mahalo nui loa. As a Pacific Islander, how can I use computing to connect to my ancestry and bring access to indigenous people?
So yeah, I think that's one of the key questions for me too, and I'd love to talk with you. But I think one of the ways that got me maybe started on the path was just kind of going back and thinking and really bringing to more like, you grow up in a place and you're just like, yeah, cool, this is how it is. And then you leave it and you're like, oh, the place that I came from, if you suffer from imposter syndrome, the values and things that we had there, maybe they're not as useful to this different world, this Western world, or maybe this white-dominated world, right? I think the first step is saying, whoa, hold on, no, my experience is actually valuable, and the things I learned are valuable, and then speaking up about it, right? When you're seeing kind of an opportunity where, hey, maybe I could talk about my own experience as a Native Hawaiian, as a Pacific Islander, as a disabled person, right? As a person of color, maybe within that time, you're like, I think I have something to add, just do it, right? and that was actually a big, difficult thing for me to get over, where I valued the experiences that I had on an equal level with the things I had learned, right, in my classes. Right? So I think that's the first step. And then the next step is finding other people that are interested in this, really like what Stacy gave such a good word on, finding that community wherein we can all pursue sustainable computational things. And hey, my lab is big, and there are a lot of people that are doing things that I do, right? I'm not the only one. There are places to connect and get involved, not just in academia, but also in industry, and you should seek them out. Right? So.
Thank you.